Over at BangTheBook.com, we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Our writers doing a phenomenal job on the daily with the NBA, college basketball, and NHL. Kyle Hunter, 6-0 in his last 6 college picks, doing a great job with that daily piece. You certainly want to make sure you check that out, as well as Parker Michaels killing it in the NHL. We've got golf, NASCAR, UFC, tennis, lots of over at BangTheBook.com as well. So please head on over there, check that out. And check out our Bang the Book YouTube page. I put up my Thursday 3-pack video, my 3 favorite plays tonight in college basketball. Kyle Hunter has a video up for today's card, and he'll also have a video up for Saturday's card over there on that Bang the Book YouTube page as well. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio, presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, up to $500. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino, up to $500. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. One guest on the program here today, that is professional handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
Brad, it's going well. How you doing on this fine Thursday morning?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, man. And signing day yesterday. You know, it's obviously something that may not impact the 20 season too much, but I know we talked about it last week. You talked about the importance of following along with those recruiting rankings. Who were some of yesterday's big winners in terms of signing day?
Well, first, let me say this. I do think it's got more of an impact than ever before as far as, you know, freshmen coming in and playing. Number one, you know, a lot of these players, I would say 25-30% are already on campus, so they get to go through, you know, 15 spring practices. That's a jump, you know, a big jump start compared to where a lot of true freshmen were, say, you know, 15, 20 years ago. And, I mean, in the last 3 national championship games, we've had a true freshman starting quarterback in every one of those games, at least one of them. So I think recruiting is more important than ever, just because you know, players are more likely to play more, and obviously if you get the right player in, it can be a nice stopgap for you. As far as, you know, the big winners from yesterday, you know, obviously Alabama at the top. That's not. I mean, if you're talking the greatest dynasty in sport, it's probably Alabama recruiting. 8 number 1 finishes in the last 9 years, so nothing surprising there, not surprising. Georgia comes in at number 2. Georgia's probably been the second best team as far as recruiting the last 4 years under Kirby Smart. Texas is a team that's going to get a lot of publicity this upcoming season because of what they did to Georgia in the bowl game, because they returned their starting quarterback, Sam Ehlinger, and also because each of the last 2 years Texas has signed the number 3 recruiting class. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of positive vibes for Texas, but I'll caution, when you look at experience returning, Texas is one of the bottom 10 teams in the country. So a little bit concerned there for the Longhorns moving forward. Some surprises, you know, A&M, and I'll just generally speak here. I think second-year coaches are the ones that I was really looking at more than anything, because it's their first full recruiting class. And we had a bunch of, you know, first-year coaches last year at name-brand programs, Jimbo Fisher being one of them. A&M just signed their best recruiting class this century. Major positive up arrow for A&M. Same goes for Florida. Dan Mullen, they signed a top 10 class, so that's good for them. Mario Cristobal at Oregon signed their best class this century. I mean, that's his first full recruiting class. That's a major positive. Same with Scott Frost at Nebraska, a top 20 class. Nebraska's first top 20 class since 2005. The major negative for one of these second-year coaches, I think 2 of them, Willie Taggart, even though the Noles finished number 16, they failed to sign a quarterback again. That's 2 years in a row, and we just saw DeAndre Francois basically kicked off the team. So Florida State's got some major issues at quarterback. Negative for Willie Taggart in his second year. And then I would say the biggest disappointment, Chip Kelly, UCLA. Are you kidding me? Your first full recruiting class at UCLA, and you signed the number 43 class in the country. That's coming off 7 straight top 20 finishes for the Bruins. A major loser yesterday was the UCLA Bruins.
Well, and I think something else that's pretty important to point out about these recruiting rankings and the level of classes that these programs are pulling is that it kind of speaks to the health of the program. And that's sort of what you were talking about there with the second-year head coaches, I mean, right now Florida State is not in good shape. I mean, they've got a lot of talent there, obviously, and, some significant holdover talent from Jimbo Fisher, but that's not a program in good health right now. And I think that may be, more so than anything. I mean, you brought up some great points about, the importance of freshmen here the last couple of years, but I think that maybe more so than anything is kind of an illustrator to me and sort of a finger in the right direction to me about how I want to start thinking about these teams, because, you've got a good coach or a program that largely sells itself and you're not pulling in good recruits. That's really concerning to me, over the long term here, and also something where I may look to fade some of those teams in the season win total market.
No question about it. And let's face it, 17 and 18-year-old kids can be very impressionable. And if you have a tough time selling them, I mean, how are you going to sell it to your donors and your fan base when there's already a lot of negativity surrounding the program? Florida State being one, SC too. I mean, SC signed the number 18 class for most, 90% of college football. I mean, anyone take number 18 recruiting class, but for SC, that's just not good enough for Clay Helton, and obviously a lot of concerns there. So, I know, I get it that generally speaking, people, recruiting doesn't matter. I think it does if you really follow it, because it's kind of what's the trend line of this program. What's going to be the storylines in the offseason? I mean, we got 8 months to talk about it, and I mean, if there's some negative storylines out there as far as recruiting goes, to me, that carries over not only to recruiting for the next year, but can carry over to the locker room a little bit. And, more likely than not, I'm not going to blindly fade the teams that didn't recruit well in the futures market and whatnot. But I can tell you this, I'd be more likely to play against teams like Florida State and SC, particularly, if they suffer a loss or two early in the season. I would pinpoint Florida State and SC as two teams that I wouldn't be shocked collapse down the stretch.
Now, maybe this is something you haven't had a chance to look into yet, and I apologize for putting you on the spot if that's the case, but we hit some Power 5 teams there. Were there any group of 5 teams that, really stood out either as a positive or a negative on signing day?
I think Boise State was the biggest winner. I mean, when Boise State can finish in the top 50 in recruiting and beat 15, 20 schools when it comes to Power 5, beat teams like Northwestern, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Pittsburgh, Arizona. Kevin Sumlin had a very disappointing first full recruiting class at Arizona. I would say big winner would be Boise State. Signed a really good, strong class coming out of there. And a couple of Florida schools also were very strong. UCF continuing. And obviously when you have a 25-game win streak, when you're playing in back-to-back big bowl games, not really surprising that UCF's one of the top group of 5. And again, not a big surprise that out of the, when you throw out the Mountain West and also the American Athletic, you're talking the 3 smallest conferences. No big surprise that Lane Kiffin and Florida Atlantic signed a big class and actually beat schools like Vanderbilt, Boston College, Maryland, Rutgers. I mean, for Florida Atlantic to sign the number 57 class in the country, that's relatively impressive. So that's not too bad there. I guess on the lower end, I'm going to throw one out there, Louisville. I know it's not a smaller conference, but Louisville signing the number 73 class might not hurt them this year, but that's 1, 2, 3 years from now, keep in your back pocket. Not going to be a lot of junior and senior leadership from that class. I guess a team that, I'm not stunned because they have a new coach, but I do follow it because it's my alma mater. But Bowling Green signed the number 129 class in the country. That's just not going to cut it there in Northwest Ohio. So I did follow that a little bit, and that was a disappointment, to say the least.
That is a bummer. I mean, you talk about Bowling Green, you talk about their location. The Northwest schools up in the Toledo area do have some pretty decent high school football players. Same thing straight down 75 in Cincinnati. You would certainly hope that, the MAC schools would get – this is – I don't mean this as a negative, but it's going to have a negative connotation to it. You would think they could get some of the scraps from Ohio high school football that, the Big Ten doesn't get. But, it seems like Bowling Green definitely up against it a little bit. And some of that, too. I mean, look, let's be honest. I mean, the athletic director Googling to find out, that he should hire Mike Jinks. I mean, the optics of that really weren't a good look. And not to say that's the reason why they pulled a bad class, but, obviously there's a lot that goes into the recruiting process that, we hear about, and then even more that we don't hear about.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I would say outside of the Sun Belt states, California, Texas, and Florida, and I would say throw Georgia in there and Louisiana. Ohio's the best state when it comes to high school football, at least pumping out and not only college level recruits, but they even higher when you get up to the NFL level. When your rival Toledo signs the number 71 class and you're 50, 60 spots behind them, that just shows me what you could be capable of if you really I would say put some effort into it. I mean, we've seen Bowling Green in the past be up there. There's just no excuse. Some of these MAC schools should definitely recruit a lot better than what they did. I mean, the state of Ohio is a very good state. It's been that way for 50, 60 years, pumping out high school players. And if you're doing your homework, you should definitely be able to get some leftovers that Ohio State didn't want and whatnot. So, yeah, it's disappointing to say the least.
I mean, hey, at least you can take solace in the fact that Bowling Green's got a pretty good basketball team and a very, very good hockey team.
That's true. I didn't know the hockey team was pretty good this year, but the basketball team has been very profitable. It's been following along off a big upset last week against Buffalo and turned around and followed up with another one of the hottest teams in the country as far as ATUS-wise. So I have kept track of that. It's probably the first time in about 10 or 15 years since the Dan Dockage era there's been any kind of excitement there coming out of Bowling Green when it comes to hoops.
Well, Bowling Green's 16th in the country in hockey, so maybe something that you do want to pay attention to a little bit more. Yeah, right? See, I think you didn't go to many hockey games while you were on campus.
No, I did not. I was too busy up and down Main Street attending some extracurricular activities.
There you go. Good for you. All right, man, let's talk some Big Ten college basketball here. And I think the big question on everybody's mind right now is what is wrong with Michigan State?
Yeah, I mean, that is a lead storyline. And look, if you asked me 10 days ago, nothing was wrong really with Michigan State. I mean, I can excuse the loss against Purdue. I just thought that was a tough spot for Sparty. I mean, prior to that, Michigan State rolled off like 12 straight wins. They were one of the hottest teams in the country, and not only straight up, but also against the spread. But to follow that up with back-to-back losses as a double-digit favorite, first at home, no excuse against Indiana, especially when College game day's in town, to lose that game in overtime. And then, you think Sparty, and Sparty's been pretty good after back-to-back losses under Tom Izzo, that they're about 60% against the spread covering. The fact that they go, to Illinois again as a double-digit favorite and lose that one, Langford's done for the season, but it's not like he just got hurt and has missed the last 3 games. I mean, they've been playing well without him prior. So, I mean, there's always ebbs and flows to a college basketball season, and I would, remiss if I didn't say, be careful on that. A lot of times I find value when those teams get on 2-3 game losing streaks and start buying them, but clearly I don't know if it ends anytime soon. I would like to give Tom Izzo the benefit of the doubt, but I had Michigan State like number 4 in my power ratings, and now they're getting to the point where another loss or 2 and they won't even be in my top 10.
Now, Michigan State here in the last 3 games, those losses to Purdue, Indiana, and Illinois, 1.121 points per possession allowed to Purdue, 1.094 to Indiana, 1.118 to Illinois. So when you look at that, I mean, would you rather, is it better in your mind to go back on a team that's struggling on offense, or better in your mind to go back on a team that's struggling on defense? Which one do you think is easier to fix?
That's a very tough question. I would like to, making shots for the most part. I mean, there's an element to luck to making shots. There just is. Obviously you can be one of the top shooting teams in the country and vice versa, but sometimes you just have off nights. When you're playing 30-some games, you're going to have 1 game or 2 where you're just not hitting your shots. I mean, similar to football, you're going to have a game where you had 4 or 5 turnovers and you're not going to play your best. I think that's easier to get back. Man, defense to me is more effort than anything. I mean, obviously, schematically, it plays a big part of it, but when it comes to these games in January and February, before it really matters come March, a lot of defense, as far as efficiency goes, is just effort-wise, and it's a little concerning that that's the problem for Michigan State. Now, again, small sample size. I mean, it's a very concerning 3 games, and Tom Izzo is more known for defensive defense and rebounding as far as his career. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but I think it's a lot easier to get back in the rhythm offensively if it just came down to you just had a couple bad games shooting, where defense, it's a concern if it's effort. And maybe they're wearing down a little bit because they're a little depth shy. That might be something to keep track of. But, again, if Michigan State hadn't been so dominant prior to this 3-game losing streak, I guess I'd be a little bit more concerned. We'll see in the next couple of games. I know they got Michigan coming up here soon, within a week or two, and that'll be a good point as far as what the hierarchy is in some Big Ten.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, too, for Michigan State, one of the lowest turnover percentages in the country on defense. So, if you are struggling on defense with rotations or, you're just not communicating well, something like that, you get some of those turnovers. It kind of, not that I'm a huge believer in momentum or anything like that, but it can change the complexion of the game a little bit, and it can, give you a little bit of a respite if you're able to take the basketball away and not really have to bear down for the whole, 25, 30 seconds of a possession. Michigan State doesn't really have that luxury right now. Maybe that's something that's hurting them a little bit more. How about a team that is, pretty good on very good on defense, pretty good on the offensive end of the floor, Michigan. That one-off loss at Iowa by 15 points, not a great look. Good bounce-back effort against Rutgers. Is Michigan the top team in the Big Ten for you?
Yeah, right now I would have said Michigan State a week ago, but right now clearly it's Michigan, and they got a big revenge game coming up here against Wisconsin, one of their other losses of the season. I can excuse the Iowa game. Iowa's pretty solid, so tough road trip there, and obviously the other one being a road trip to Wisconsin. So as far as punching holes in their game, they're not spectacular. They don't have the Zion Williamsons and the R.J. Barretts like a Duke does, but when it comes to tactically X's and O's, both offensively, that's Beeline's specialty, and then he made one of the better defensive hires in the country last year, and really Michigan's defense, they've been known more for that here the last year and a half or so when they made this run. There's not a lot of holes in Michigan's game, and right now there's no question about it. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the highest upside. I still think if Michigan State gets their act together, Michigan State's got some upside, and I think a true test will be, coming up this weekend on Saturday, hosting Wisconsin. I think Michigan will be right around the, probably a 6-point favorite or so. If they take care of business against a Wisconsin team that's been surging ever since they outright upset the Wolverines, I think that'd be a good sign that Michigan really put that Iowa loss behind them.
So hopefully our Bang the Book Radio listeners jumped on the Purdue train, because we talked about how good they've been playing offensively. We talked about how they were a better defensive team than they had shown. Now all of a sudden they're moving up the defensive ranks rather quickly. So is Purdue kind of in that number 3 slot for you? How close are they to overtaking Michigan State for number 2?
They're getting up there. Again, Michigan, it's real close, because right now I have Purdue power rate number 10 in the country. That's pretty strong for a team that has 6 losses. And obviously Purdue with 7 straight wins and had 6 straight covers prior to, they're starting to get a little expensive. In the Minnesota game, they failed to cover by a bucket in their most recent game. But, yeah, I certainly have Purdue, and I think when you look at it, possibly after I update my power ratings every single Friday, it's going to be real tight between them and Michigan State. But looking at Purdue's schedule, I don't see a clear-cut loss really down the stretch of the season. Not saying that they're going to run the table here, but there's not going to be a single game where Purdue isn't, either favored or a very short underdog. So I don't see any reason why Purdue's run here doesn't continue. So, kudos for you guys jumping on that. Obviously, the big win against Michigan State really, got them going. And then in a flat spot against Penn State, they're up against it. It's overtime on the road. They find a way to win and cover. A lot to like about Purdue. They're right along with Nebraska. We're not talking just Big Ten, but we're talking nationally to the more upstart teams here in the last couple of weeks.
How about we touch on a team that I really haven't heard too many people talk about here lately, Maryland. You'll get Maryland in adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency over at Bart Torvik. They're top 30 in the country in both, and I feel like nobody talks about the Terrapins.
Yeah, and the Terps had a big win last night against a reeling Nebraska team. Maryland was getting a lot of love, and then, they lost to Michigan State, turned around, lost to Illinois, and then lost to Wisconsin. So, recently, they had been playing maybe some of their worst basketball this season, so I get that they fell out of love a little bit in the marketplace. But, again, a very big road win last night. And coming up here, they got about a week off, and then they host Purdue, which will be a really big game. I mean, I have Maryland power rated right around number 26 in the country, so I think clearly above the cut line when it comes to making an NCAA tournament. But a win against Purdue at home would do wonders for them. They're going to need it because right after that, they're at Michigan and at Iowa, so a really tough stretch here for the Terps. But I like them. I mean, I think there's been some value on them, and Turgeon does a good job as far as the head coach goes. I mean, they always seem to be in the mix.
Now, you mentioned Maryland with almost a week off here. They play 6 days after that Nebraska win last night, so they go from Wednesday to Tuesday. There's a lot of rhythm to the college basketball schedule, and one thing I did notice here about the Big Ten over the last couple of weeks, they're playing some games on different nights. I know Maryland's played some Friday night games. They've played Wednesday. They had a Thursday night game, not Maryland, but there was a Thursday. There's a couple of Thursday night games, I think, here over the last couple of weeks. They're kind of moving this schedule around. Does that bother you where you've got teams that are maybe getting, 6-7 days off here and then have to shake off the rust and, go play a big game?
No, I think actually the opposite. I think this time of year there's a grind, and if you listen to coaches, throughout the years, if you're going to need a week off, I think this is the time of year where you might need one. Now, if you're Kentucky and you won 9 straight and you're freshmen and your young players are really starting to come together, a team like Kentucky, no, I wouldn't want a week off. But, a lot of these teams, let's face it, you're about halfway through your conference schedule. You got a month left as far as the regular season to make that final push. I think, and more often than not, a week off this time of year can do more positive than negative. But obviously, just like any other team or situation, when you look at it, it's case by case basis. But out there, broadening that topic a little bit, I like it that these teams are playing, on specific different days, because a lot of times you can find some matchup edges where you got a team that's got 3 extra days rest compared to another. And I don't think when you got 353 Division I teams, I don't think the marketplace always properly accounts that for in the line.
All right, so as we look up and down the Big Ten as a whole, we've got some elite level teams, we've got some very, very good teams, we've got some very good teams, some good teams, and then some pretty good teams. There's no team in this conference that is absolutely terrible. Even Rutgers, just outside the top 60 in defensive efficiency nationally here this year. They're not good offensively by any means, but still pretty good defensively. So what about the rest of the Big Ten here? Teams like Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Penn State, Northwestern, Rutgers. Anything, are those teams, spot play worthy? Anything you do like or dislike about them?
Well, I'll give Penn State credit. I thought they were a dead cat. With their coach shoving a player suspended, they started off the Big Ten season 0-10, and they went on the road to Evanston and beat Northwestern outright earlier this week. And that was coming off of, a high-level effort game against Purdue, where they nearly won that game at home and then ended up losing in overtime. So I think your general point is right. There's not a lot of layups come Big Ten this year. Rutgers is better than what they've been in the past. Illinois has been surging. Illinois is a team, forget looking at the straight-up record. They played one of the more difficult schedules in the entire country, and that's seeming to pay off for them as they go down the stretch with several big wins. If there's a team that I would say that looks like, I just mentioned Penn State looked like a dead cat. I think the dead cat right now in the conference, roadkill, is Nebraska. They lose Copeland. It's already a pretty depth-shy team already, really relies on their starters. They lost their second leading scorer in Copeland, and now it's a team that's now lost 6 straight games, failed to cover the spread in 6 straight. Their head coach, Miles, was already kind of on the hot seat. It was kind of NCAA tournament or bust this year. They started the season, Nebraska, borderline top 10 team in power rating. That was kind of their high point at the end of December. And now it looks like all is lost for Nebraska. So if there's one team that I'm looking to fade right now in the conference, regardless of where they stack rank, I think Nebraska's in some big-time trouble. And, a home game last night where they're about a 2-3 point favorite, they get beat up pretty good against Maryland. At Purdue on deck, that's not going to be easy. I think Nebraska's a team that I would like to fade moving forward.
All right, so with the late cancellation from Tony George and him unable to join us, I do want to ask you some of the talking points I was going to ask him. One of them being, you've got teams that are playing an opponent for a second time now in conference play. So you've got revenge factors, you've got a rematch factor. How do you handicap those?
You got to be real careful. You're looking for outliers, but those outliers might, represent, specific matchups that a team might have over another. So I like to look a little bit, and I get it. There's turnover come college basketball more so than maybe college football, but I like to look a lot more than one game. I get it, revenge. Specifically, if you get upset, big time, obviously the revenge factor is something that you got to consider. When Duke plays Syracuse again, that would be one but it's going to be priced in the marketplace more often than not. One that I do like is, if you get, upset at home and you go back on the road and maybe you're a short dog, that's been a long-term, more profitable trend is playing on that team that was upset at home in the rematch. But a lot of times be very careful because there might be specific matchup reasons for why that team got outright upset in that first meeting. So maybe take a peek at what happened last year with some of these teams, especially and not necessarily the top 10 teams in the country because there's roster turnover there, but your mid-level conferences, a lot of times you have the same players. So if there's a specific matchup reason why a team is struggling, be very wary of that and not just blindly play on these revenge factors in home and away.
That's an excellent point because I think a lot of people just sort of look at it and say, oh, well, that team's going to get revenge. And especially if it's a name brand type of team. And like you said, maybe it's just a bad matchup thing. And this will come up again in conference tournaments when, we hear everybody saying, oh, it's so hard to beat a team 3 times. Not if you're better than that team. Not if you match up well against that team. Too many people take that for granted, I think, of, oh, well, they're going to get revenge. Maybe they just don't match up well.
Yeah, and I'll give you a great example from this week, and I fell prey to it. Marquette, 16-1 their last 17 games. That one loss was against St. John's earlier this season. So I played into the revenge factor. I thought it was a decent number. Marquette was laying around 6.5. This is from the other night, and what happened? Marquette loses outright again at home. So you got a Marquette team that's 16-2 straight up their last 18 games, and both straight up losses come to St. John's. So for whatever reason, and I haven't found anything too specific what St. John's does, but obviously I'm not going to be on the Marquette side if those two teams meet up in as far as a Big East Conference tournament, and it's a good possibility they will. And they're both probably in the top 4 of that conference. So I'm not going to blindly say, hey, Marquette lost the first 2. Tough to beat a team 3 times in a season. No, to me, those 2 performances are such outliers that for whatever reason, St. John's is a bad matchup for Marquette. So I'm not going to fall prey to that a second time.
You know what pisses me off is I actually looked at that game. And, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, they beat Marquette by 20 at home. Marquette's probably got to be pissed off here in this game, and deservedly so. They certainly should be. And then I was looking at the schedule, and St. John's played Duke on February 2nd. And then they go and play a former Duke assistant with Marquette the next game.
Ooh,
and I thought,
good point.
Well, they've got the blueprint. They already beat them by 20. They got blown out by Duke, of course, the game right before that. But, I'm thinking to myself, I should do something with this. There's a play to be made here. This is a St. John's team that beat Duke last year on February 3rd. So maybe it's just this type of Duke scheme that they can play against. Keep that in mind, I guess, if these 2 teams run into each other in the Big East Conference tournament.
Excellent point. And schematically, it can make a difference in a lot of those. And another reason I played against St. John's, I guess I should have dived deeper as far as the Duke angle, but St. John's was at Creighton, at Marquette. For a team that's in the Northeast, that's a hell of a lot of travel, and that was just in a 7-day period. So that was another reason why I played against it. But obviously the matchup factor, for whatever reason, overcame all those what I perceived to be negative factors for St. John's. That's a good one. And I'm going to throw one more out there because we're talking matchups. Washington's the team that's been surging in the Pac-12. I mean, they got a second-year coach that's from Syracuse that's doing that zone defense, and the Pac-12 is having some big-time problems adjusting that zone defense. They just hadn't seen it in the conference for such a long period. And we see it all the time why Syracuse is so good in March. Those teams aren't used to seeing a zone defense. Those specific matchups are a lot of reasons why these teams go on runs.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too. I mean, I think sometimes, there are so many stats and so many efficiency metrics and things like that out there about college basketball now. But, how many times do we talk about this in college football or in other sports? An assistant or a coordinator goes to, another school and those two schools wind up playing, or, they play a team that played their previous employer the year before and had success with it. And we happen to overlook those things. I don't know if it's just because so many of us get so deep into the numbers or, whatever the case may be,
yeah.
But man, there's, and it's tough too, because, you look at it after the fact and say, well, shit, I should have saw that. I should have recognized that. I should have realized that. There's information overload. I know it's something that you talk about all the time, that paralysis by overanalysis thing. It's a real thing, man. It's a real thing. And you talk about 353 college basketball teams and everyone trying to do college hoops now. I implore our listeners to be very careful not to fall into that trap.
Yeah, I agree. And again, specialization. I mean, if you really want to do it, and I guess the problem I run into, I do so much media that I have to, focus in on 5 or 6 of the bigger conferences and then talk about them. But really, ideally, if I was just betting for a living, more often than not, I just focus in on a couple of smaller conferences. Just know the insides and the outs of that, and there's a good chance you can know the market better than most. Now, the issue would be, can I get enough money off of on some of those games? But, if you're just doing this as a hobby but you want to be successful, again, and you're doing it part-time, something, as a hobby, and when you get home from work, just focus in on a conference or so and just, try not to overwhelm yourself trying to know everything about all 353 teams. It's a lot better to know a hell of a lot about 20 teams than it is a little about 350 teams.
All right, so if we've ever talked NBA here on our segments, I can't remember doing it. So maybe this is a first for Bang the Book Radio. I'm not entirely sure. I guess maybe we probably talked some NBA playoffs at some point or something like that. Maybe talked about the Cavs and LeBron, I don't know. But speaking of LeBron, the Lakers tonight in Boston. The trade deadline today at 3 o'clock Eastern time. So a lot of moving parts. We've seen a lot of trades here already. I want to sort of lump together handicapping the trade deadline with that big marquee game here tonight between the Lakers and the Celtics.
Well, I think we clearly saw it, the effects of it the other night on Lakers. They were a favorite against the Pacers, and they were in a really good spot. The Lakers had multiple days rest. They needed to win if they had any hopes as far as the playoffs because of their upcoming schedule, especially tonight against Boston. I think they're on the road against Philly up next. They're playing a Pacers team that had played the 3 games in 4 nights. So Lakers are favored, and somehow they lose by 42 points. That's only happened as far as a favorite in the NBA lose by 40-plus points. It's only happened a total of 14 times in the last 24 years. That's, once about every 2,200 games, something like that happens. And clearly, I guess the biggest takeaway would be, how would you feel if you're a Kyle Kuzma or a Alonzo Ball or an Ingram, and for the first time in your life, you're pretty much told you're not wanted. You've been talked up your whole life, preached about how you're the best in your AAU, you're the best in high school, whether you went to college or not, but you're talked up. Now all of a sudden you're expendable for the first time in your life. That probably doesn't feel good for those young Lakers players, and clearly they proved it by a complete no-show the other night. So I think clearly distractions. Now, do I want to blindly play against the Lakers, all the time? No, but I definitely don't want to play on them with all these distractions going on right now. And right now the market says Boston, at least the early money, is coming in on the Celtics here after that dismal performance by LA the other night. So, generally speaking, these teams with a lot of question marks, I think it's fade city come the NBA. And then even if trades happen, like say Philadelphia, and I know I'm going a little long-winded here as far as off topic, but Philadelphia, at least for this season, has a really good, strong starting five, but don't automatically just start playing on them. Remember, it's going to take 5 to 10 games of integration to get these players going. So after the trade deadline, I think a lot of teams that made big roster moves, give them 5 to 10 games to get things going. I mean, keep in mind, the Miami Heat, when they got Bosh, Wade, and LeBron, were 9-8 their first 17 games. Generally speaking, the teams that make big roster moves, either from distractions or integration, I want to fade more often than not.
Well, and what's really interesting about that here this year is that you've got the trade deadline, and then in a week, the All-Star break starts. So you play maybe 2 or 3 games to try and get that integration going and get some chemistry and get everybody to gel. And then all of a sudden, you don't play with each other for 5 days or whatever the All-Star break is. Guys go on vacation, spend time with their families. Some guys will be in Charlotte for the All-Star game. So even if there are practices or shoot-arounds, not everybody's going to be there. You're going to be missing your most important players, the guys that have your highest usage rates and need to learn how to play with these new acquisitions. It's a very tough time of the year across the board in the NBA, but especially with teams in a state of flux, like the Lakers.
No question about it, and kudos to those guys that can figure out the motivation factors. I know you talk to a lot more people on a day-in and day-out basis that cover the NBA, and I tip the cap for those guys that can figure out properly and motivate these players, because you can have some real easy winners if you handicap it correctly. In just my inner circle, I haven't found too many people that are having overwhelming success when it comes to handicapping in the NBA this time of year. In fact, a lot of them are more cautious than not when it comes to releasing picks on a day-in and day-out basis.
Brad Powers, professional handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Yeah, we talk about it each week. I mean, newsletter's still up there for $69. The next issue, you can download all past issues for free if you want to check it out. 57% all-time winners. That's a 600-plus game sample size when it comes to college football and the NFL. And we'll have another one coming your way as far as the next newsletter up will be in March. But, I mean, right now, I guess, if you're talking, you want to get on board with BP Sports right now, we have a VIP package, the daily email updates as far as college basketball. You'll get one every single day through the national championship game in early April. It's $199 for those 2 months of college basketball VIP action, $199, and then the newsletter is just $69. Check it out, bradpowersports.com.
And as always, you can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPowers and the number 7. Brad, I know I kept you a little bit longer here today. Really appreciate the time and the flexibility. Thank you so much, brother, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Take care, my friend.